Hello, everybody, and welcome to ABL Down on the Farm, episode 5. Excited to have you all here tonight and being joined by a special guest, Dave, owner of the ABL Oakland Athletics. And we'll have him on in just a second. ABL Down on the Farm is, of course, a prospecting show dedicated to all things prospects, but particularly those in the ABL, a 30-team dynasty league with a beautiful 20 minor league roster for 600 glorious prospects that we can talk about and debate. And I am joined, like I said, about one of my league co-owners or owners, Dave. And I'm going to bring him in now to talk about prospecting, all his dynasty exploits, and what it's like to be the owner of the Oakland A's and soon to be the Las Vegas A's, I think. So we'll bring in Dave. Hi, Dave. How you doing?
Hey, glad to be here. I have not thought at all about being renamed to the Las Vegas A's, but that's fun to think about for the future.
Yeah, I know. You're going to be like in a whole new city and, get all these questions about why you moved the team and, but on the Vegas Strip, think about all the new concessions and add-ons you can have at the stadium. So that'll be good.
Yeah, we have 5 sports books right in the stadium.
That's right.
That'll go well.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen when the young players go down to the Vegas Strip, and end up in like nightclubs and whatnot. But we'll see how it pans out for you. So listen, thanks so much for being on the show. Great to have you on. And, I was really interested to have you join the show because you've got a very kind of deep dynasty background that I think is broader and deeper than a lot of the guys in the league, even for the ABL owners. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Maybe you could explain kind of how many dynasty leagues you're in, how deep they are, and kind of, how far you're stretched in terms of evaluating all these prospects.
Yeah, so 2011, the Cardinals just won the World Series. I was in high school at the time, 16 years old, and I was doing some fantasy leagues. I was really addicted to MLB The Show, played it all the time. I was on Reddit at the time. I was actually a moderator of the Cardinals subreddit way back when. If you go there now, they have like a CSS design on it still, and like the framework was like put in place by me. I just learned CSS just to like ramp up the website, just because it was like a simple, white page way back when. But some guy who I'm now great friends with, because it's been 12 years since then, posted on Reddit that he's like, hey, I want to try a 30-team dynasty league. And it was not something I'd ever heard about at the time. And he's like, be 18 years old or older to join. So I lied. I just wanted in. It wasn't for a ton of money. It was only like a few $100 if you championed it. But But I joined, and I've been in that since. And ever since I joined that league, I haven't really been able to go back to 12-teamers or even like 15-teamers consistently. My sense of value is just way too skewed now towards 30-team leagues. I look at like a 12-team waiver wire, and every single player on it looks interesting to me. So it's weird, but yeah, so I've been in that league just as the St. Louis Cardinals, which is my hometown team, born and raised in St. Louis. And then I also, a few years ago, at the same time I joined ABL, I was really looking to try specifically a salary and contract league, because over in my main, which I'll call Reddit Dynasty, we had done a lot of talk like, hey, we've been doing the same rule set, which is just like a standard keeper league with some intricacies with promoting prospects and graduating them. But we didn't have a lot of way to make things equitable. If you have 10 players that you're keeping every year and there's no limitation on it, squads can just get stacked out of control for a long time. We've had guys in that league that have never been bad, just partially because they're just good owners, but also they're allowed to kind of exploit the rule set that we have, which is fine. Every rule set can be exploited in some way. But so I went hunting for how do I set up a salary and contract league for a 30-team league. I found Duke's post. I joined. I basically took the parts I liked out of the ABL Constitution, which is I really do enjoy the ABL's rule set, but I mixed and matched those two with that rule set with RD and made Franchise Legends, which I currently commish. We've had a couple owners from ABL in that league over the years, but I think the only one still there is Jeff Cardinals. He's the Cardinals and Franchise Legends as well. So
of course he is.
Yep. So that's kind of my background. 12 years been doing this, and then a few years as commissioned.
Yeah. So the commission
was my first salary.
Are you just the commission in that league, or are you also an owner in that league?
Oh, I'm the Chicago White Sox in that league. So I'm the Cardinals in RD, the White Sox in FL, and then the Athletics in ABL.
Right. All right. So we'll get in a little bit later in the show, how you manage prospecting across all those leagues. And I'm interested to hear your approach in holding prospects over such large and deep dynasty leagues, because not a lot of people have to do that. I mean, I'm for example, I'm in a lot of dynasty leagues, but I'm only in one 30-teamer. I've got like a 16 league team, the 20 and the 30. So there's a lot of variation, and certainly going to your point about skewing value, stuff that happens in ABL is very different than what happens in my 16-team league, right? And the trades that you make are entirely different. The number of prospects who are available, the type of prospects you might roster in ABL, you would never roster in one of these other leagues because you're just not deep enough to roster those guys. And you kind of have to discipline yourself not to start adding those guys because you fall in love with them in ABL, and they really aren't going to have any value for a long, long time in those 16-team leagues. So I'm interested to hear how you do it, and we'll get into that. But before we do, I'm just curious to hear how you've evolved in your prospecting approach since you started doing it in 2011 or roughly around then, and kind of what was the learning curve like for you? And where are you now in terms of what you utilize generally speaking, and how you approach prospects?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I first started out, even back in 2011, 2012, MLB.com would put out a top 100. Baseball America would put out a paywall top 100. Fangraphs, I think, was early stages then. Baseball Prospectus would put out their book, so it was a little less accessible than it is now. Mm-hmm. There were independent creators still then that were putting out content designed for deeper minor league rosters, but it's gotten a lot better since then, and I've used a lot less of it. I think the vast majority of content available in the public domain for looking up prospect value is just completely worthless. I don't spend hardly any time at all reading anything unless it's specifically from sources that I trust. Mm-hmm. I don't think so. I know the league, I think, does not like Eric Cross very well.
Right.
I'm in total agreement with that. I thought Eric Cross, in terms of prospect evaluation, was no better than anyone from ABL. Not necessarily that he was bad, but no one from ABL necessarily would be bad at it either. If it's your full-time job, you write something, but.
Right. I mean, look, I don't want to bash Eric, I suppose, individually on the podcast, but I think the point generally is that there are a lot of talking heads in the industry, yeah. Right? And it's not clear to me they have any credentials to be talking about prospects. They come up with lists, they rank them, they debate them on Twitter, but there's a lot of noise. And we talked about this on the last episode with Josh about culling through the noise to get to the sources you trust, right? How did you come to arrive on whatever sources it is that you kind of trust today?
Anyone that's talking to scouts or is a scout. so Baseball America, I kind of just implicitly trust that even if their evaluations I don't necessarily agree with, just like in terms of ranking one guy over another, they're connected in to the network. The name of the game right now is not Moneyball anymore. You're not trying to find players that are underrated just with their skill set. You're trying to find the next development discovery. You're trying to find players that have unlocked something, and their value is suddenly skyrocketing, and you have to just jump on that, or you have to have a source that you trust that is now relaying to you, hey, scouts are watching this guy. He's throwing harder. He has changed his approach in some way. He's added a ton of power or bat speed to his swing. Something's different, and that's what I'm looking for, basically.
Yep. No, I totally understand that. I mean, that's why I call it prospecting. You're looking for gold, right? And that's the gold. Like when you start digging and you find out somebody is chirping about a prospect and specifically what that prospect is doing that has evolved, right? Or developed in some way that wasn't there before, and therefore that prospect is not on somebody's list, right? That's when you feel really good, right? I mean, that's when you add a player and you're like, well, you know what? And talk to me in a month and a half. Like, because by that point, the industry will integrate the information on the player, and then it'll become very valuable, either to trade or to hold, right? But if you get them early, the acquisition cost is next to nothing, right?
Right. Yeah. And I have a lot of thoughts about that, but
well, please share.
No, proceed. We'll get to it later.
That's all right. Well, that's great. So you landed on Baseball America, and I've been very vocal about Baseball America being one of my favorite sources, and I trust them too, precisely for the same reasons you articulated, which is that they're plugged into scouting and they talk to people, and they themselves look at players live, right? In addition to video. Are there any sources that you kind of initially relied on that you've kind of discarded over the years?
Fangraphs, I just don't really. The way Longenhagen does it now is bizarre to me. Just in terms of at the very minimum, if you're trying to appeal to the largest audience possible, it should be the fantasy audience. I guess Longenhagen is trying to do something in the way where lists should be updated based off the timeline of the draft instead of at the season. But I just fundamentally disagree with how he approaches sharing prospect information with the world. And then also just because of how long it takes him to put out content, I don't necessarily trust that what he's putting out is up to date anymore. The amount of time he spends working on this and what he puts out is a lot of content, and for some of the very deep players, it's more information than you'll get from almost any other source. But for the guys that matter in a league like ABL, which is almost as deep as it gets, 600 minors guys rostered, past the top 20 is usually not going to matter too much. And at that point, who needs to know about this besides actual MLB GMs?
Right. What I find interesting about Fangraphs is that they are very conservative about scouting grades, right? I mean, if you go on the 80 scale, right? So many of their prospects they rank at 40 or 45, their overall grade, right? Or they just give very low scores for varying skill sets, power, speed, hit tool, whatever it is. And I just find it very difficult to kind of figure out what they're doing, how they're arriving on that, because those grades will wildly deviate from Baseball America, and sometimes the content of the write-up doesn't match what they're grading the player at, right? So if I can't understand what they're doing, I tend to discount it. If you can't explain it to me and articulate it in a way that is digestible, or just reveal it, whatever you're doing, I tend not to trust it. So I only use Fangraphs now for stats, there's certain things they report, certain ways they report stats that are useful to me. Both at the minor league level and at the major league level for redraft leagues or keeper leagues. But I too have kind of like gone away from that. Anything else you've like gravitated towards over the years?
I think just, like I've said, I've really cut down the amount of sources that I trust. But also I've just started trusting my own evaluation of what matters for player development. I'm sorry, not player development, player evaluation, and just like their current skill set.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of look at trends over the years and, export some Fangraphs tables over large ranges and see, just patterns of guys that showed these stats. And that, because that's all we have to go off of, unless we're at games, we're just going off stats. So we really just have the option to look at all these stats and say, what are the best indicators that we have? And there's a lot of good content publicly about what are some of the best indicators for carrying success from the minors to the major leagues, or showing that a guy is about to unlock another level. Maybe they're just unlucky.
Yep.
Stuff like that. That you can really, a lot of it is just trusting your own eyes. At the beginning, I didn't really have any disposition to saying like, oh, I know more than a scout. And I still wouldn't say I know more than a scout, but I would say that I've done so much study on it that I can, near the level of a scout, use the stat line to find good indicators of what a good player looks like.
Right. How much do you use? Because I've had a similar kind of evolution, if you will, where I've gotten to the point where I feel like I can independently judge these players and also judge them in terms of what kind of fantasy players they're going to be. Right, which is a slightly different analysis than the scouts may be engaged in. Right. So that there's some stat lines that I'm more interested in, some skill sets that I'm more interested in for purposes of fantasy, including format of the league I'm in and scouting the players for, that I'm focused on. But what are some of the indicators, and I'm happy to talk about the ones that I use, that you've kind of gravitated to over the years?
Well, the best one for pitchers is just good old K- walk.
Yep.
I mean, even when you look at the best models available, they're all trying to beat K- walk. And I think even like the hot model right now is Eno's Stuff Plus model.
Yep.
And even that only beats K- walk by like a little bit. It like stabilizes quicker and it does better results over long periods of time. But like K- walk just being publicly available, I think Stuff Plus is only goes down to AAA because that's as far as Savant goes down. Like they don't have the setups at lower levels.
I believe that's right.
Yeah. And so like at AA, which is very important, especially right now because they have different balls down there right now.
Yeah, and different grips in some leagues.
Yeah. Just being able to find the one stat right there, which is just incredible for evaluating pitchers and predicting their performance.
It doesn't rely on anything other than just the math, right? In order to like be reliable to you, right? It's not contingent on what ballpark the player's playing in, whether there are enough cameras, whether there's enough, site of, pitch location or whatever it is, shape, whereas the Stuff Plus that they're doing now, which is incredibly sophisticated and very interesting to me, and not that I understand really any of it, it's just the results that I can read. But K- walk, yeah, like I get that. There it is,
Yeah, hitters are a little more complicated. I'm basically trying, and I think other people, I've found some sites that don't update constantly, but they've provided some formula to predicting out 90th percentile exit velocity, which I think is one of the best indicators, just purely from like a hitting perspective of this guy is a guy.
Right.
Hitting is there's so many ways to hide how poor you are at hitting in good results, doing just a ton of different things at the minor league level. Minor league defenders aren't as good, so a ground ball approach can work if you're just smashing, worm burners. The air at like AAA, all those AAA stadiums in the Pacific Coast League are at like crazy elevation. So fly ball hitters there just get their stats padded, and like pitching stats there just get destroyed. So there's a lot of kind of just junk you have to filter out. I don't have a perfect formula for figuring out that 90th percentile exit velocity, because I wish, the day that Savant is in every minor league stadium and that data is publicly available, I think the fantasy community is just going to take off with prospecting.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, and it dovetails with what we were talking about just a second ago, just the lack of consistency in terms of where the data is available, and figuring out a way, as you pointed out, to also discount for environment, which is, and even the minor league stadiums themselves are just wildly inconsistent. Whereas at least at the major league level, while there are some eccentricities about various parks in the league, there's some form of consistency about the parks even, right? And, in terms of the outfield depth, again, some variations, sure, but it's much more stable. There are a lot more cameras. There's a lot more data for the major league level. The minor leagues, you just know what the hell you're going to get, right? And never mind the DSL, which is like an entirely like deeper pool and uncharted waters in many ways for this analytics stuff that's coming out now. One of the interesting things for me, and the data is just not available yet at the prospect level, is the way I would like it to be is an analysis that Baseball HQ does on launch angle and exit velocity, and then the consistency of those two things and the stickiness of that. And they do that at the major league level. So they'll rate players in terms of 90th percentile for each. And they have a whole grading system for players. And you see that really tends to be sticky year over year. And when you see a change, that suggests a change in approach, right? Or unlocking another tool, like they're reaching their raw power when the exit velocity goes up. And for them, every year, they have a leading indicator for players that are about to break out. And at the end of the season, if you look at that list, it's pretty good, right? But that data is just not available at the minor league levels in the same way. And I think you're right, when that starts to happen, and eventually it will, I think it is going to unlock a whole new Pandora's box for, fantasy owners to like really, delve into and be excited about. Well, that's really interesting. Let's jump into some of the topics for tonight's show. I do want to talk to you about managing all these prospects in your various dynasty leagues and how you possibly manage to approach that. I wanted to talk a little bit also about your minor league roster in ABL, because you have an interesting blend to me of both stars, really highly rated prospects, but also some diamonds in the rough, or at least guys that I really like. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts about how you kind of collated this group of players together. And then, I always like to talk about crushes and fades, and, players you're high on, players you're kind of out on, and why. And certainly any questions along the way that you have that you want to talk about, feel free to, jump in with those too. But, let's talk about, these three massive dynasty league teams that you have, right? And is it 20 roster spots for minor leagues in each one of them?
In FL, so I did, well, let me preface this. In RD, we do 15 minor leaguers per team. So a little bit smaller, 150 less from a league-wide perspective. I did, when I created FL, I used ABL's 20 model. So it's RD's 15, and then FL and ABL are 20 and 20.
So that's still 55 prospects you have to get on your board for those three leagues.
Yeah, and for the most part, I don't really have hardly any overlap between them, just because of different ways that each league takes towards acquiring prospects.
Okay, so that choice not to have the overlap, and it sounds like it is a little bit of a choice. It's premised more on the format itself rather than, say, a diversification of investment, philosophy that some owners have.
Yeah, and this is something I guess I probably have a stronger opinion about it than most owners. I would say that the method that ABL allows us to acquire prospects, and by that I mean I can acquire any prospect in the MLB auction because it's before the minor league draft. And then I can also just acquire any prospect with FAB and they get full benefits to that. We don't have that in FL or RD. And so I've been used to those for so long that being exposed to this just makes me think, oh, well, the ABL minor league draft past a certain point, I would say like even like past pick 30 in the minor league draft is almost worthless to me from a minor league value perspective. And not to say that having those picks is invaluable because you can trade them.
Right.
Their teams do like those picks, but to me, it's just like hardly worth it at all because I've already brought this up. This is the age of player development. Information changes a player's value rapidly. Like if we did the draft now, I would not have taken Jace Young where I did. But that was just I had a first round pick and he was the guy that seemed the best at the time.
Right.
But it's been a month and a half since then, and now the whole layout has just changed immediately.
Well, the other side of that coin, right, is that it could be an overreaction to a small sample size, right? I mean, I think one of the things we suffer from in the fantasy community is the deluge of information, right? And if you believe that prospecting is a long game, right, and that prospect development is not linear, there's something to be said for like just maybe getting a couple months data before freaking out. And we've all seen plenty of prospects that struggle at one level or for a whole year and then unlock something the next. And, a guy I got out on, I was in on him very early, was Jackson Churio. And he had a mediocre DSL campaign, like cut bait with him. And I forever regretted it.
That's painful.
Yeah, I mean, and now he's struggling again at AA ball, so maybe I'll be able to pick him up again at some point. But the cost has gone up, right? So I hear you about like Chase Young. I just I always find it amusing when owners are talking about somebody being a bust or like, geez, you went too high or this or that. It's been a month, and most of these kids are like 19 or 20 years old or younger, right? I mean, we'll see. I mean, Jared Kelenic was a bust before this year. He seems to be all right, But I take your point. And look, I think the acquisition or the ability to acquire minor league talent in ABL, certainly benefits owners who are very well steeped in prospecting, right? Because, maybe a fourth round pick isn't that valuable, or even a third round pick is not that valuable in your head. But part of that may be, correct me if you think I'm wrong, that you feel like you can replicate that off the wire.
That's exactly it. I feel like, especially once you get past the second round, because I feel like first round is pretty much a mirror because everyone can just acquire pop-up prospects on the wire or even buy them in the major league auction. And then once it gets to the actual minor league draft, it's going to be more or less, not the exact same order, but it's going to mirror the first round of the real life major league draft.
Right. Right.
So it's just like for the most part, once you get past the first round of the real life major league draft, the hit rates really start to fall off. And that's kind of how I feel about the first round of the ABL draft. And You may as well just, with the ability to acquire guys on the wire, you can just grab that 5th round guy that is randomly hitting, and he didn't go in the minor league draft, and so he's just there, and I can get him for 1 fab. I have 50 of fab, so
Yep.
The risk there is almost nothing, and the reward is that you may have a future major leaguer at a supremely discounted cost.
Right. And, they're, fungible too, right? You can just like drop and pick them up throughout the course of the season. So, the lost opportunity cost isn't that great either, right? Whereas you have a 3rd round pick in the draft, you feel like, you got to like hit on that. You got to do something with it, right? And maybe you should trade it, right? And, move up in the subsequent year, get some, major league player for it. I mean, I certainly am very open to trading my picks outside of like a top 15 pick. Because I feel like I can do in the 4th or 5th round what I can do in the 3rd round. Because to me, the drop off after like the top 30 goes from above average players to average players pretty quickly. Right.
I would say that happens after like the top 10.
It could.
Yeah.
It could. I mean, I think that there's probably, it depends on the class year too. I mean, I think, for example, this year's draft was very deep because we had 2 DSL classes in it, 2 J2 classes, and, the first year player draft as well. That'll get thinned out a little bit next year, although the next draft class is supposed to be very, very good. But, you could have 55 grade players going, in the top, up to 20, 25 in that draft last year. But after that, certainly you're talking about 50 grade players, right? And, would I rather take, and I would, because this is like what I do, I would rather take the J2 player in round 5, who might be a 60 grade player. It's high risk, but it's a 4th round, 5th round pick, right? I mean, like, what do I care? And I'd rather trade those other picks. I mean, it sounds like you have a similar philosophy, but, how do you view like the J15s and those DSL prospects?
Unless I read about them, like when Jason Dominguez was first, coming up, he was hyped out of control, and it was so weird because it felt like every actual industry source I read was just like, yeah, he's probably like a top 40 guy right now, which is great for a J2 guy. But no one was, calling him the next, Babe Ruth or anything in the industry sources.
Right.
Part of it was Yankee stuff, but as far as like J2s in general go, unless the industry is really in on a guy, and Jackson Churio was a guy they were really in on. Ellie, they were really in on. Samuel Basallo, who you mentioned earlier, it felt like they were really in on, and Ethan Salas is. I would not be shocked if Ethan Salas was a number 1 prospect in the future.
I would not be shocked either.
The amount of, I actually watched him I was down in Arizona in spring training.
Tell me about that.
It was the first game that Ethan Salas went in. We were just randomly at the game. I was with friends from RD, which is my main.
Mm-hmm.
And we were there for the World Baseball Classic, so we caught some spring training games while we were there. By the way, we were at the Mexico USA game in box seats, and there's been like some articles since then about how impactful the Mexico USA game was for baseball in Mexico, and I really have to back that up because the atmosphere at that game was unlike anything I've ever seen in my life.
In what sense? What was going on?
It was, so for one, it was crowded beyond belief. The line, just again, the stadium, we got there, I think 2 hours early, and the line stretched like 4 blocks out of the stadium to get in. Once you got in, the amount of just like Mexico, Mexico chants that were going on was electric just listening to it. And we got to our box seats, Mexican flags everywhere, some USA flags. The USA crowd was notably less invested in this game than the Mexico crowd was. And then when Joey Meneses hit that home run in the first inning, the stadium just exploded, and
it was like a rock concert.
Yeah, that was great. Anyway,
question though is, were you wearing USA paraphernalia?
I was in a I was just in a standard Cardinals jersey. Since then I have bought a Lars Nootbaar Cardinals jersey, which is now my go-to. If you can't tell by my ABL squad, I love Lars Nootbaar. But at the time I was just in Cardinals gear. I had a Team USA hat, but I didn't have a USA flag or anything like that.
All right. Well, you want to keep be respectful when you're in somebody else's country too, so that's all right.
well, it was Phoenix, but
but you were in somebody else's country in the stadium.
yeah. Basically, it was basically Phoenix, Mexico at the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, though, we were down in Arizona. We were at that random Padres spring training game. We knew of Ethan Salas because when you're in these 30-team leagues, the information passes down to you that a 16-year-old just signed for $5 million. So we knew the name, but then they announced on the scoreboard he wasn't even in because they hand out roster sheets for spring training because it goes through like the 80 guys that might appear in this game, and Salas wasn't on it. And we're like, there's no way that is Ethan Salas in this game right now. He is 16 years old and catching, I don't remember. It might have been even like Darvish pitching at the time, but there's no way he is in there. And yep, that was the first game that he appeared. And then like the reports after the game were just, scouts across the industry were stunned how mature this guy looked on the field. Like he looked like a major league player.
Yeah, no, he's a remarkable prospect because he is so young, and the Padres are being very aggressive with him. They're skipping all kinds of levels for this kid, and it's going to be really fascinating to see how he hits over time, because he's going to be by far the youngest player in every league, every level he's in, and playing basically the toughest position in the sport. Because there's a whole bunch of other stuff you got to do as a catcher, right? And to develop on that side of the ball too. But in our ABL league, and Jeff, Cardinals Jeff was able to get him in the draft, and then it might end up being the steal of the draft, because I think you're right. He will very soon have like athlete lore about him, and possibly he was even better. I mean, to be 16 years old and to be like already in low minors, it's phenomenal. I mean,
yeah, Jeff Cardinals, if you're listening to this, shoot me an offer with Ethan Salas in it. Unless it's really crazy, I'll probably accept it.
I have a sense of Lars Nootbaar, like Ethan Salas trade is coming. That's right to the heart.
Man, there's something about having the one guy that you're just like in love with, like a favorite player in a
He's your Whitney Houston player?
Yeah, basically. I love Lars Nootbaar. As soon as I can get my hands, because I don't think they were available, and they may still not be available, but as soon as I can get a Team Japan Nootbaar jersey, I'm gonna do it.
All right, hey man, whatever floats your boat. I mean, as you know, I'm a Cardinals fan too, so I like Lars, not as much as you do, but but I like Lars. I root for him, so that's great. That's great. But, sometimes you got to trade like your love affairs to get the young minor league prospects that you want. So you never know.
Yeah, it would be tough for me to turn down Nootbaar for Salas. But
yes, yeah, I'm brokering a trade right now. Say, I can get this done. We get Jeff on the show. He'll listen to this probably afterwards, but I think I've started a rumor. We're gonna have a trade rumor mail for the show as well. There's one. Salas for Nootbaar. You heard it here first. All right. Yeah.
All right.
So let's talk about this. So you've got these massive rosters, and we talked about how you're not really trying to intentionally diversify, right? But what's your approach in the leagues where you have a shorter bench, or the leagues where it's more difficult to acquire minor league talent, or more expensive, let's call it? How is it really different from ABL to those other leagues?
So I'll just speak from my main, which is RD. The only way to get a player in your minor league roster in RD is to draft them. They have to be taken in the minor league draft. Otherwise, they literally just cannot go in a minor league spot. And so there's no way to like get there's also benefits to graduating a prospect there. You get to keep them for free. They don't count against your 11 keeper cap for 2 years after they graduate from the minor leagues. So you can have your 11 major league keepers, and then you might have 6 graduated prospects still in their first 2 years in the league. And that's kind of where the value in that league comes from. So because of there's additional restrictions versus ABL, and there's additional benefits because you get them 2 years for, there is no limit. I mean, here they only cost $1 or something, but there is no limit to the value you get from keeping them. So with that in mind, I prioritize acquiring draft picks in that league way more than I do in ABL. First round picks there in that league are like gold.
Right.
The way that I exploit the rules in that league is that I will build as strong of a roster as I can during the regular season. I'll trade prospects to do it. And then when it comes time to cut, I'll just move strong players that, I just want first round picks again, because those first round picks, I'll just keep the ones that really hit, and then I'll move the ones that are kind of like, oh, this guy's good, but he's kind of like a top 50 guy. And then I'll just acquire those strong players I had to cut earlier again from teams that are struggling.
Right. Well, it sounds like the ABL gives you a lot more latitude when it comes to prospects, and you feel like now that you've kind of hit your stride in kind of evaluating prospects, it might be a sweet spot for you, right? Because you feel like you can kind of read between the lines, between the sources that you trust, and pick out the gems that other people haven't, kind of picked up on yet. And now you can get them outside the draft in the ABL.
Yeah, like if I had the option in RD to just go on the waiver wire and just constantly scout it for players in the minors that are starting to, it looks like they have changed something and they're starting to hit, I would be way more active in the waiver wire on that in RD. But right now in RD, the activity, the dynamic and change in roster comes primarily from trades over acquisitions, because the waiver, it's a 30-team league. The waiver wire is complete garbage. That's just how it is.
That's how it is in ABL too at the major league level.
Yeah, although I will say ABL's wire is, at the major league level. So in RD, we only have 6 bench spots. So there are guys that, like, there are relievers that are good. There are like some bench players that might put up like 9 or 10 points a week, like on a decent one if they get a few starts. But in ABL, unless you want a backup catcher, you're not getting anything.
Nope.
Unless you're the first one in on a guy that got called up. I got Mercado for some reason. I just put in $1 bid on him, and
that is interesting that you felt you.
I don't know how that happened. I was kind of just like, he might play a couple games, and then
he got hot.
Yeah.
Well, so the upshot of that for everybody listening is that you should be very wary of people like Dave and me when we're trading away prospect picks, because it's a free for all on the wire. But you use that to your advantage, right? So let's talk a little bit, having said all that, about your roster in ABL. And you've got an interesting blend of players, and it kind of makes sense to me now, having heard how you approach prospecting this league, like the players that you have, because you do have some real stars. You've got Ellie De La Cruz, you've got Andrew Painter, some real household names in that regard, and those aren't your only good players. I just named the 2 kind of like top echelon ones. But you also have an interesting mix of other players on your roster. Christian Mania is a guy that I like and I've been following. And you've got Sam Balalos, the catcher in Baltimore, who's a young stud coming up the ranks. And I'm kind of curious, how you go about thinking about whether to pick some of these guys up that are lesser known, maybe on the wire, what you're looking for. And maybe you can use one of those guys that I mentioned or somebody else as kind of a, template for how your decision-making process works.
Yeah, sure. So I would say a lot of it just comes down to um, identifying what has changed. And I've talked about that a lot, but for hitters, hitters don't so much display change in a rapid way. If a hitter has made a quality change, something in their profile has altered, it's going to take a month or even longer for that to really start showing up in games.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for Ellie, it took like 2 weeks. He learned how to walk. So, I mean, I don't necessarily buy that completely. Like, I don't just buy that, like, oh, Ellie can walk now. But I do buy that he has altered his approach somewhat, and maybe he's not like a 30% K, 4% walk guy. Maybe he's a 28% K, 7% walk guy, which is a lot more playable.
Sure.
But for pitching versus hitters, if a pitcher changes something and then they go into the next start and they use it and it works, that is instant. And that is instant feedback for you. Kyle Hurt, I acquired at the same time as Mercado, and he was the guy I actually prioritized over Mercado, which is why I was surprised I got Mercado. I wasn't sure how that happened, but Kyle Hurt last year, he's just a random Dodgers guy, and same with random Rays guys. If there's a random Dodgers guy that suddenly starts doing something, I just grab him. Because
good organizations to pull from.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, the Orioles too.
yeah. The Orioles have Sig Mejdal, the NASA guy who was on the Cardinals at one point. Leading their player development. He's like the assistant GM or something there, but they're very heavily player development now. That's kind of how I got clued in on Cade Povich too. So, but yeah, like Kyle Hurt has suddenly changed his range of outcomes. He's just stopped walking people. Last year he walked like 37 guys in 31 innings at the higher levels, and this year he has like a 2 walk per 9. So it has been a radical change. He's still striking out guys at a crazy level. He's built like a starting pitcher. He's like 6'3", 220 or something, 230. Mm-hmm. So
let me ask you about that, what you just said about height and weight. How much emphasis do you place on that? Because I have my own view, which I'm happy to share, but I'm interested in what you have to say about that.
It's harder to succeed if you don't have the right height for a starting pitcher. Extension does matter. That's why they track it on Baseball Savant. It's not the most important factor. I randomly saw that just people talking about spin rates for, I think it was Brian Bellows' fastball.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, thought I should put in my opinion there. But like the most important factors, there's velocity, movement, tunneling profile, and then like extension is not one of those, but it's still up there. So I do look at height a little bit. It's not the first thing I look at, but it is something I'll consider because orgs do use it, especially ones that are not like at the top of the player development spectrum. They'll still look at the 5'11" guy, and then they'll look at the 6'3" guy. And if they're pretty even, they'll just go with the 6'3" guy stays in the rotation. The 5'11" guy goes in the bullpen.
Yeah, I look at it more from a durability standpoint and hedging my risks. If I see a guy who's 5'10", 5'11" is trying to be a starting pitcher and he weighs, 175, 180, I'm concerned. If he weighs 160, I'm really concerned. Right? Because I just don't know how he's going to hold up over time. Doesn't mean he can't. Doesn't mean he can't, right? But if I'm taking educated guesses on guys, like I will gravitate towards the taller, heavier pitchers, with some exceptions. But guys that I was like kind of down on or less the consensus on were Jack Leiter, and Meyer was another guy I was down on because of his height. Meyer's obviously hurt. Is that necessarily a correlation? No, but it's certainly a fact that I put in my draft prep. It's one of the columns I have is height and weight.
Yeah, I have given up on estimating durability from pitching prospects. It's just to me, it's just going to make me depressed. So I'll just look at a pitcher, and if they haven't gotten hurt before, I just say, okay, well, no injury history, but it will come. I mean, Andrew Painter, it does not have a torn UCL. It's not a torn UCL, but it kind of is.
Yeah, I'll put a lot of weight on scouting reports in terms of the delivery and whether they have any pitches that are max effort and what kind of arm angle they're taking. So I tried to read between the lines, but it's very difficult to ballpark durability for these pitchers. It's all educated guesses, and there's no science to it, as best I can tell anyway. Maybe the major league teams have a way to figure it out, but I don't think they do either.
Yeah, I think the major league teams are really focusing on so you're a Cardinals fan. There's that he's kind of a fraud, but there's the Payne guy that used to be on Twitter. You know who I'm talking about?
Uh-huh.
And he had like ideas about this is what pitchers that never got hurt did in their delivery, and they talked about the inverted W that you would have, which an inverted W is just I don't know why he ever. Anyway, he's kind of a fraud, but he was kind of the first person that I saw online that started talking about there are certain mechanics that pitchers do that I think this leads to injury. I don't think anything that he said was necessarily right, but I bet the next breakthrough for organizations is trying to figure out, because I don't think anyone has figured it out. If they did, they would strike gold.
Well, interesting. Yeah, interesting. I'm sorry to interject. There was an article on Baseball America, and they've had a series of articles about how AI might affect scouting in terms of projecting, durability and success and repeatability, consistency, those kind of things. And it is an interesting notion that these computers might be able to actually forecast in some way and be so precise that we actually get some kind of metric that they can generate that illustrates durability. I don't know what that is, but it is an interesting idea to me.
I mean, we have I don't know which camera does it, but paired along with cameras like the Edgertronic, there are some development facilities. I think Driveline has one where they measure the torque that is on the structure of a pitcher during his motion.
Right.
And they're trying to, no one has really figured it out. They figured out things that are bad, and it turns out throwing a really fast fastball is bad. Shocker.
Right. Going max effort all the time is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. That might have something to do with it too.
It is interesting. They learned that throwing really hard fastballs is worse for your arm than throwing any amount of breaking balls, which is why I think we really have started to see a lot more orgs are like, hey, stop throwing your fastball 70% of the time. Throw your slider 60% of the time, and then have that be your primary pitch.
Mm-hmm.
Forget establishing the fastball.
Yeah, and you are seeing that in all levels, right? I mean, you're just seeing more and more shifting. I think Ronci Contreras right now is shifting to more sliders. And it's going to be interesting to see how that develops because he's having a hell of a lot harder time striking people out. But you may see a breakthrough, in a month or two with him because he's just now his pitching profile's changed. And he's got all kinds of development things going on with him. So I don't know where he's going to net out, but it is interesting that his pitch mix has changed recently. So what was it about Hurt? Where did you read about him that kind of clued you in that this is a guy you wanted to pick up?
So one of the first things that clues me in is, so I will literally, there are MILB, I think the website uses MILB tracker, where it's just a really helpful for this day, show me the stats for all minor league players, and it gives some helpful filters to it. So I use that website, And then for every night, just before bed, I'll spend like 2 minutes on my phone. I'll go to the website. I'll go to the full pitcher list, and I'll just click strikeouts. And I'll look, okay, who struck out the most guys today? Because, I mean, if you're not even using K- walk, the best single indicator of if a guy is going to get to the majors is how many guys do they strike out.
Yep.
And Hurt randomly that day pitched like 4 perfect innings with 10 Ks, and I had never heard the name, and he's age appropriate for the level. I mean, 24 is a little older for AA, but it's not so old. Like I have Pat Monteverde, that's 25 at AA, but anyone that's below 27, I would say is still like a work in progress.
For pitchers,
at the major league level.
Yeah, for pitchers, I think that's right. I mean, there are some recent studies that suggest that if you like want to really increase the likelihood of success, you do want them younger than that at AAA and at AA correspondingly. But you know, this is all kind of like educated guesswork. You think 24 at AA ball is? We'll see if he gets promoted to AAA, right, or whether he skips, right to the majors. I mean, that's kind of the tell. I've got a guy, David Sandlin, who I picked up, who's kind of a similar kind of breakout guy, who is 22 and he's in high A ball. And I want to see him get to AA this year.
Right? I was on David Sandlin. He had started to appear, and because I'll run my own little. It's nothing complicated, but it just kind of like has like a little spreadsheet that I have that'll pull the best performers, and it has like a little weight for age. It's nothing scientific, but it helps me like figure out who is really interesting at a very base level.
Yeah.
Sandlin was on that almost immediately. I think I thought about picking him up at one point. I just didn't have enough information, and I picked someone else up instead. I think it might have been Coleman Crowe. I don't know.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, who's to say which one will end up being better? I don't know. But I saw the K- walk ratio, and by the time he got to I think his 4th start, I was like, all right, that's enough. I'll go get him, right? Because there are just too many sharks at ABL. Eventually, somebody else and see you were thinking about him. Josh said he was thinking about him. Like somebody would have picked him up, right? So I don't regret it for the $1 fab that it cost me. So that's fine. So listen, let's talk a little bit. This is part of my favorite parts of the show. It's like your crushes and fades, the guys you love and the guys maybe that you're, less bullish on than consensus.
I really would like to acquire Ethan Salas, Jeff. Please send me something. No, but I mean, yeah, Ethan Salas. I mean, for guys that aren't necessarily top 100 right now, Robbie Snelling. I'm really in on. I have him in one league. I took him with my last pick because he had kind of appeared in some scouting reports as like, hey, this guy has an interesting mix. And the Padres are really good at certain aspects of player development. I think they are one of the best at just purely identifying under the radar talent at an amateur level. Mm-hmm. So getting picked by the Padres is kind of a plus for me. And then since then, he's really kind of taken off.
Yeah, I had him in ABL and traded him to Sam. And I will end up regretting that.
It's always the same owners that have prospects that I'm interested in. It's you. It's the Red Sox.
Interesting.
Yeah. The Jeff Cardinals always seems to have guys that I'm suddenly interested in. It's always the same teams.
Well, that means, Dave, is we have to start talking more. Yeah. You see somebody you like, you got to come to me. I mean, I'm sure the guys in your roster that I like, we may end up fleecing each other somehow on the same deal. So you never know. So, all right, besides your love affair with Salas, which I understand, okay, and we are going to broker a trade with you and Jeff to get Salas on your roster. We'll figure out how to do that. Let's talk a little bit Ellie De La Cruz.
Hell yeah.
So tell me all you want to say about Ellie, because I like him too, but I'm interested to hear, how big the love affair is now. How much Whitney Houston have you got going on here?
So, name the list of guys that have if you okay, I think I heard this on Rates and Barrels. Like, name the list of guys where if you just add up the value of their 20 to 80 scale across all 5 tools that match Ellie De La Cruz's total at the major league level, because a lot of the skills are just flat values, like arm and speed and raw power are just flat values that you can kind of calculate.
Yep.
I mean, I think the list is it's single digits for sure, and it's probably less than 5 that just have the pure skill set that Ellie has. I am so over people worried about the strikeout rate. We have so like Cardinals fans. We had Arozarena, we had Adolis Garcia, 2 guys that also had a ton of power, a ton of speed, but they just didn't have the hit tool figured out. Adolis really didn't have the hit tool figured out, and we had a log jam, and we just couldn't give them the time. And when you give those guys time to really develop out their skill set, because you can't hardly teach speed at all. You can barely teach raw power.
No, you can help people access the power, but you can't teach it, right?
Yeah. And especially from like a hitter perspective, you can barely teach arm strength as well. Mm-hmm. So Ellie can play shortstop very well. He has a cannon. He is as tooled up, if not more, than O'Neal Cruz, who is also, him, being out for the season is like the hugest bummer this year to me.
Tell me about it, brother. I'm the guy.
Do you have Cruz?
Yes.
That sucks.
It does suck.
Yeah. Well, if you want to trade him to me, I'll trade you something good.
I'm sure you would.
Yeah.
I'm sure you would. I have Cruz out right now and Jazz. So,
God damn.
Good times.
Yeah.
But let's not get derailed from Ellie. Yes, I interrupted you.
No, all good. It's just when guys are so tooled up like that, and Jackson Churrio's another guy who he doesn't have the screaming elite tools that Ellie and Cruz have, but like he's up there too. And when guys you can't teach talent. You can teach almost everything else but pure talent. And when guys have that freak athleticism, that phrase gets thrown around a bunch for Ellie, I'm way more in on it than I used to be.
Yeah, well, the other thing about Ellie at this point, I totally agree with you about athleticism, and I target that in prospects, particularly at younger levels, because you just never know which one of them are going to hit. But if you have a bunch of them, like you've got some of them, if you know what I'm saying. Ellie now, he's showing it at higher levels, right? And so when you get that confirmation that they can play, they're not just freak athletes, but they can play and hold their own against higher level competition, that's pretty special. That's exciting, right? So, he's on the precipice of the major leagues, and he's a guy who may come up and struggle, right? When he starts his career. But if you just hold on to that kid, sky's the limit.
Yeah, that's the thing. You really have to be okay with not trusting the results over everything. Once they're in the majors, you have so much data that's coming in at you that you can then take that data and then just apply it to how do they compare to other players that have had this type of skill set. The number of players that have Ellie's skill set is small. But how do they compare to guys that have had similar, like if he does come up and he struggles, have they compared the guys that have had similar struggles, and how long did it take them to turn it around? Did they ever turn it around? I think you'll find for Ellie, he's just, I don't know. To me, he's just too talented to not make it work. So
I think you're probably right. There have been cases where like a guy was tooled up and just never made it. But like, if you're a betting man, you bet on him, right? It's a special athlete, and it turns out he can play a little bit of baseball too, right? So that's that confirmation, that I like to see when those freak athletes come in. Joe Adele is like a kind of on the other spectrum. He's like kind of never been able to put it together at the major league level, and it's kind of one dimensional. It turns out, at least thus far in his career. But Ellie's kind of flashing the ability to do a lot of different things, and that's kind of exciting. So tell me some fades, some guys that maybe you're down on relative to consensus.
Yeah, I think I don't really have too many like specific fades. A profile I'm kind of out on is Gavin Stone.
Tell me why.
It's change-ups. I just don't really trust the change-up being your primary out pitch. This kind of also extends to Grayrod a little bit. Another guy that has an elite change-up. Although I do think Grayrod has a path to being better in the future if he just stops throwing 2 of his pitches. I think he has like 5 pitches on Baseball Savant. And I bet the Orioles may try this soon because they do have good player development. I bet they're going to tell Grayson Rodriguez, stop throwing your curveball, stop throwing your cutter. Let's iron out these, your 4-seam, your changeup, your slider. Let's stick to those and let's get you through 5 innings and let's just see how that goes. And we can work on the other stuff in the lab. I bet if he does that, he's going to, put up crazy numbers because he's throwing, in my opinion, he's throwing bad pitches intentionally 20 to 30% of the time. So,
Right. And, it's interesting. A pitcher that is got that sort of repertoire in the minor leagues can get away with a lot of like mediocre pitches because of the quality of the competition he's going up against. But at the major league level, if you keep kind of throwing those junk pitches out there, the hitters are just too good, right? And they're just going to crush the weak pitches. And so there is this learning curve of like actually trusting your good stuff.
I think Spencer Strider specifically has really altered my view and probably the fantasy industry as a whole's view of what makes a good pitcher. And it's not necessarily a deep arsenal. If you have just 2 elite pitches and you can tunnel them perfectly off each other, which Spencer Strider is basically, if you go to his Baseball Savant, he has the perfect location heat map that you want to see for his pitches, which is why he's so good. I talked about you with this before we started, but I have floated Ellie before, and I got close to a deal with the Blue Jays owner, with Strider.
Yeah.
It never formulated. I just kind of backed out. The price for me got a little too high. I mean, it was a fair deal. Strider's probably gonna win the Cy Young.
He could.
Yeah.
He could.
So and Ellie has also kind of taken off. So I don't think either of us are really upset that didn't come to fruition. But
no, you bring up an interesting point with Strider because the parallel for me for Strider is Dwight Gooden in 1985, right? Who basically won the Cy Young with 2 pitches, his curveball and his fastball. And, that was a time when pitchers went deeper in games, right? Strider, like doing that for just 6 innings, maybe 7. I mean, that's very sustainable. And you don't necessarily need that deep repertoire to get through that few innings. Gooden eventually needed to develop a changeup to help him, keep going deep in games, right? But it's a different era now. Gooden also had all kinds of off the field problems, which screwed up his career. But but that 85 season, he basically was perfect, and ridiculous. That was probably before your time. You didn't get to see.
Yeah, that was 10 years before I was born, but yeah, that's okay.
I was 15.
Yeah.
So there you go. I have a signed ball by Gooden behind me. So
oh, that's awesome. I mean, that 85 season is like, it's still up there with best pitching season of all time, right?
Oh,
it's not the best in the modern era.
It's right up there. You had John Tudor had a great year that year for the Cardinals. You had Gooden. Fernando Valenzuela had a great year. I mean, they're just, Roger Clemens kind of like had his first near breakout season. 86, he won the Cy Young. But, Dave Stieb in Toronto was great that year. The list goes on. I mean, Jack Morris was good. I mean, it's a deep, deep pitching year for sure. And that was the time when pitching was just dominant in baseball, the 80s. I think only like the late 60s had like a higher dominance ratio, which of course, because of Bob Gibson, they lowered the mound. Well, listen, this has been really fun and interesting, and I always learn a lot from the other owners, and this is like fascinating to hear about your process. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Hearing about your crushes and fades is always good. And I wish you the best of luck with Ellie. We will get a Ethan Salas trade brokered for you. We got to figure that out. If you need me to mediate that, you let me know. I'm interested in bringing this to fruition, so we get you and Jeff back on the show after the deal is done, and then we can talk about how it was made to happen. So thank you, Dave, for coming on. I really appreciate it. Hope you had a good time. And for the audience out there, remember to ABP, always be prospecting. All right. Good night, everybody.